Hello. So welcome to Clean Air Task Force Zero Carbon Future Pavilion, where I am delighted to welcome you to this event, a global supplier of zero carbon fuels, how the Middle East and North Africa can embrace climate leadership. My name's Olivia Azadigan. I lead our Middle East North Africa work for Clean Air Task Force. And I'm delighted to have with me my distinguished panel of speakers to discuss this topic. So Adam Saminsky from CAPSARC, Senior Advisor to the Board of Trustees. Daria Novacek, Director of Policy and Partnerships at the Hydrogen Council. Paul Number Director of Infrastructure and Sustainable Development, Middle East, North Africa at the World Bank. And Kamal Banasser, who is a Senior Advisor to the Clean Air Task Force. And also CEO of Nomadia Energy Consulting. Thank you so much for joining us. So just to start off, to frame this conversation with COP27 here in Egypt and the next COP held in the UAE, the climate conversation is really turning towards the Middle East, North Africa region and the decarbonization opportunity for stakeholders within the MENA region to position themselves for leadership in the new energy economy. The Middle East and North Africa sits at the nexus of Europe, Asia, and Africa. And all of these have their own energy needs. And Middle East, North Africa governments and stakeholders are well positioned to be a leader in the future energy markets. Our last conversation, we talked about the need to decarbonize global energy markets, and this conversation will look at how the Middle East, North Africa can position themselves for the long-term success in the new energy economy. There are many actors in this region that have the know-how, the technical expertise, the natural resources, the geographic positioning, the technical competencies to play a leading role in supplying that decarbonized energy to markets around the world, whilst also proving the innovation and the climate solutions that the world desperately needs to see. Carbon capture, hydrogen, ammonia, upstream methane emission controls. These are some of the solutions that the region is demonstrating that is helping to build up that clean energy supply, both for its domestic use and for exports to the international markets. And since different regions will have their own needs, their own economies, their own local circumstances, based off, there'll be different technologies that will be needed in order to see the decarbonization pathway. The GCC economies, for example, are resource-rich economies. They have the ability to deploy both renewable energy sources as well as the low-carbon energy sources, such as hydrogen and ammonia, as well as other net zero technologies. However, this market will need to be developed through global partnerships. And I brought together this panel today to discuss how the Middle East, North Africa region is approaching this and how it sees itself. But just to start off, just wanted to give a little bit of framing of why there is a zero carbon fuels opportunity and what is the opportunity for the Middle East, North Africa region. So achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions is going to depend on a mix of decarbonization technologies. We'll need to see efficiency, renewables, and then fuel switching, CCUS, and other. Tech and other such as behavioral change and behavioral efficiencies, electric vehicles. And this chart here is taken from the IEA, and it shows that all of these sectors and all of these approaches will be needed if we want to have a chance of fending off the worst effects of climate change. And low carbon fuels, fuel switching, CCUS and power is going to play a large chunk in what we're needing to do. And if we're just focusing on the efficiency and the renewables piece, we're going to miss a huge part of the problem. And that's where the Middle East, North Africa is really demonstrating what some of those solutions are. So low carbon fuels, 80% of end use energy is currently provided by fuel molecules like coal, natural gas, and refined petroleum. And these hard to abate sectors are important within today's economy, and likely fuels will continue to play an important role in a future decarbonized economy. But we'll need to see these switching to ones that are kinder to the climate and take us closer to our decarbonization goals. So with that, the Middle East, North Africa has a unique properties and a unique role in playing a part in how it can scale the supply of these alternative technologies and low carbon fuels. Middle East, North Africa, many resource-rich countries in this region that have both that renewable, non-renewable sources. It's a traditional energy supplier to highly industrialized economies and can continue to play that role in a decarbonized world. We also see within the GCC the legal frameworks, human capital, supply chain, infrastructure, expertise, know-how on how to produce these low-carbon fuels. So there are a number of factors weighing in its favor that make it an important player in the building of this future decarbonized economy. And if we just look at the existing flows coming from this region today to Europe and Asia, the GCC currently exports about 80% of crude oil to Asia, and European importers as well. African energy demand is also expected to increase by 40% by 2030, and the Middle East, North Africa will play an important role in exporting some of these clean energies to Africa. And we're already seeing signs that this future energy market is beginning to move. This chart here shows hydrogen agreements between MENA and globally, although I should note that there have been some more added since this chart was made. But these are all largely announcements. Nothing has really gone to in final investment decision other than a few select. But these trade flows are showing that there really is this opportunity, and European and Asia players are looking towards the Middle East, North Africa to tap into its potential as a decarbonized energy supplier. But what is important to note is these are adding up to the order of hundreds of thousands of tons of hydrogen, and the future hydrogen opportunity that the IEA and other projections are stating is going to be at the scale of tens of million tons of hydrogen. So we need to start taking these initial MOUs and these initial first movers towards volumes, and to do that we're going to need to see policy. The MENA zero carbon fuel export pillars, infrastructure, financing, resources, trade relations, governance and political stability, supply chain and technical know-how. Some of the countries in this region have a number of unique properties that will allow them to do this. There are some challenges that we will need to overcome. We need to see more studies and scenarios. We need to see more, we're seeing zero carbon fuels and CCS on the agenda, some exciting announcements here at this COP around that as well. But we need to see more of that, and we need to see more collaboration, partnerships to build that market. We need to see more funding, we need to see more long-term planning and more comprehensive strategies on both the production side and the demand side of this equation in order to really see this market begin to scale up. So MENA hydrogen targets, long-term policy signals, we're seeing support for the demand creation. We need to start mitigating that investment risk so that we can see more financial capital flow into this market, more harmonized standards so that the exporting and importing countries have agreement as we build that new market. And MENA is showcasing its capabilities and commitment to producing this decarbonized fuels market. And what we would like to see is that to match that future projected demand. So with that, I would like to turn to my panel to discuss this opportunity and hear from some of the actors in this region and other players within the hydrogen opportunity as to how they're seeing this challenge and how the region is seeing this and what are the next steps that are needed. So maybe we can start with Adam. Adam Szyminski is at the CAPSARC, which is an energy think tank that is supporting Saudi with its net zero strategy. So I think Saudi's had some exciting initiatives announced at this COP, some other initiatives under the way. Adam, perhaps maybe we can start with you. How do you see the role of Saudi Arabia in kickstarting this market and the activities? And how does Saudi Arabia see itself as a clean energy producer and supplier?
I think maybe, there we go, great. Well, Olivia, first, thank you very much for inviting me and the other panelists. I'm delighted to be here. It's wonderful to see all of the people from the Clean Air Task Force again, Lee Beck and everybody else. So great to be here. When you talked about zero carbon future, but when you sat down, you said Saudi Arabia's net zero ambitions, and I think that that's a really important distinction to keep in mind. That zero carbon might not be necessary, but net zero would effectively allow us to get to the goals while still preserving the opportunity to use traditional fuels, fossil fuels, hydrocarbons, however you want to call it. So I think that's an important distinction to keep in mind. Saudi Arabia has been approaching this through the framework that's called the circular carbon economy. And it has many of the elements of that first slide that you had up there. Reduce, which includes efficiency and renewables, as well as nuclear power, I think, which is going to be important in the region. Then there's reduce, in addition to reduce, you have reuse and recycle, so finding ways to find positive contributions that carbon or carbon dioxide can make in the economy. And then finally, remove. And the idea of remove is very, very important. And in fact, the technologies associated with that, things like direct air capture, carbon storage geologically, and so on. But I'm going to point to this beautiful picture you have over here of a coastal zone. Nature-based solutions are also very important. And tomorrow, I think at about 1 o'clock or something in the Saudi pavilion, there's going to be a big panel on nature-based solutions. So Saudi Arabia kind of looks at this as it's important to think about the suite of technologies as broadly as possible. Don't leave anything on the table. This problem is huge, and in order to solve a huge problem, I think you have to try every option. Coming back to the idea of reduce, reuse, recycle, and remove, I think that's how the kingdom is approaching this. There were a couple of big announcements yesterday. One was, and I think you mentioned it in the last session, Julio did, the carbon dioxide hub, which will also include hydrogen, in the industrial city of Jubail, just to the north of Dhahran and Dammam in the kingdom. And the Aramco and the Ministry of Energy signed an agreement. They hope to have 9 million tons annually of storage going on by the year 2027 and up to 44 million tons by 2035. Julio Friedman mentioned to me earlier that 44 million tons is big in terms of the scale associated with doing this, that it would be more than the equivalent of all of the electric vehicles being sold worldwide last year. So let me just end with that thought. One of the things that has to be kept in mind, and you mentioned all of the advantages that the MENA region has in terms of being an oil and gas producing region. That means it also has carbon dioxide storage capabilities. It's got the technology. I think the finance can come, and I think that we have to view this region as one of the ways to scale up the effort in order to achieve what everybody sees as the desirable goal of reaching net zero by 2050 or 2060. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Adam. And yes, carbon capture and storage momentum, we're seeing that in the US, we're seeing that in Europe, and also now in the Middle East. So it's an exciting development, as it will be a critical technology in order to achieve our goals. So Kamal, maybe we can go over to you. Kamal used to be the chief economist of ADNOC over in the United Arab Emirates. How are you seeing things moving in this region? Do you see a role for Middle East, North Africa, GCC countries, especially, to be supplying this clean energy and these fuels, both for its internal consumption, but also in helping to support the building of the market in Europe, Asia, and the developing world?
Thank you very much for the invite, Olivia. Can you hear me? So if we look at since the COP21, 3 out of the 7 COPs after COP21 would have been in MENA region countries, starting in Marrakesh in just in 2016, this one, and I think you have to switch off, yeah. And then the one next year in Abu Dhabi. 3 out of 7 COPs are in the MENA region, which is about 40% of the COPs actually happening in the MENA region. So the countries in the region are taking the environment and the decarbonization extremely seriously. If you look even further than that, back about 15 years ago, when IRENA was launched, it was in Abu Dhabi. There was also the very pioneering project of the Masdar city in Abu Dhabi. So all these are testimonies of the engagement in the region. Now, let's look at other things that have happened in the region. We have had several CCUS projects in the regions. The first one actually was in Algeria, in the Ain Salah field, where they were separating CO2 from gas, injecting it to about 1 million tons per year. That was 15 years ago, 16 years ago. So, and then this was followed by the Othmania project in Saudi Arabia. This was also followed by the Riyadh, the first steel project where CO2 was captured. And now we have also projects in Qatar. So you have 4 of the CCUS projects happening in the region. So in terms of track record of the region, they have the experience to engage much further in the decarbonization. And as Adam mentioned, the plans going forward are extraordinary. Because if you look at the announced hubs for hydrogen, we have the one that was announced for Egypt, there was one for Morocco, another one for Mauritania, another one associated in Saudi Arabia, UAE, and I'm sure Qatar will follow and Oman will follow. So we are talking about 6 potential hubs for hydrogen in the MENA region. So the momentum is there, the scale is there, and certainly in terms of support from the governments, you have what it takes.
Great, thank you so much for that, Kamal. Daria, maybe we could bring you in here. How are you seeing the hydrogen potential and the outlook for this region? What are you seeing as some of these cross-border trade flows between MENA and some of its export players? What do you think is really needed to take this to the next level?
Thanks so much, Olivia, and it's a pleasure to be here on behalf of the Hydrogen Council. We have most recently published our global trade flow study, and if you haven't seen it already, I would encourage you to go on the Hydrogen Council website and have a look at it, because it actually provides a very interesting insight and outlook into how the trade flows, both in hydrogen and derivatives, will evolve going forward. So to all the way from until 2030 and until the mid-century. And interestingly, if you look at the potential of the MENA region, it is indeed outstanding. So when it comes to the cost of hydrogen in particular, we see that countries in the MENA region, alongside Chile, will in fact be the lowest cost hydrogen suppliers globally, and we are talking less than $1 per kilo of hydrogen. So we see in particular UAE, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, alongside Chile, being in this group of the least cost hydrogen producers globally. So there is indeed a huge opportunity to unlock the cost efficiency gains with those cross-border trade flows connecting the renewables-rich countries. And of course, in the Middle East, you have extraordinary solar potential coupled with wind, and low-cost gas that can be coupled with CCS, which translates into indeed a huge potential for exports. And creating those cross-border trade corridors in hydrogen and derivatives can actually lead to massive cost savings. So we estimate that the cost savings can amount to some $6 trillion US dollars by mid-century, which is huge. Again, matching supply and demand in a cost-effective way can help unlocking real cost efficiency gains, while at the same time making sure that we move forward and stay on track with our climate goals. We estimate that hydrogen can contribute to abating some 80 gigaton of CO2 by mid-century, and which is indeed not negligible. So unlocking flows can bring not only cost efficiency gains, but allow the countries to stay on track with their net zero commitments and indeed boost security of supply in the countries who will remain to be net importers of clean energy carriers, and at the same time support sustainable growth of the exporting countries in the global south and indeed in the MENA region. So we see huge potential when it comes to hydrogen and derivatives for the region. And when it comes to the enabling measures, oftentimes when we talk about the development of those value chains, international value chains, we focus a lot on the physical infrastructure. And of course it's needed, but alongside the hardware, we need the software, meaning enabling global standards, certification schemes for hydrogen, and indeed the regulatory framework. And when it comes to the latter, we are, as the Council, supporting the development of a common global standard methodology for assessing the carbon footprint of all hydrogen production and transportation pathways. This work has already started and has been launched by ISO, the International Organization for Standardization. So we are really encouraging all the experts and also national governments to delegate experts to join the development of this common global standard, because that's the only way we can compare apples and apples when it comes to the production units of hydrogen across the world. And making sure we avoid that fragmentation of standards and we work on common global ISO standards is absolutely key. And we see actually that ISO standards already form a reference for a number of legislative frameworks worldwide. For example, the EU's taxonomy for sustainable finance. It refers to specific qualifications for hydrogen to be qualified as a sustainable economic activity, and to evidence those as a reference, we have an ISO standard. So we need to also, I think, really move away from colors and focus on the carbon footprint of hydrogen and have a clear, common, robust standard. And we very much support the work that is being done at ISO level. So I would highlight that in particular. And also on certification, we see that countries around the world are developing their own schemes for hydrogen. Even though we would want to have this common global scheme, unfortunately, it's not attainable. What can be attainable, however, is mutual recognition. We need the schemes to talk to each other and to have that mutual recognition between the scheme to enable and pave the way for global cross-border trade. I'll leave it here, but happy to take questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Daria. I think it's very important now that we move away from this colours conversation and look towards recognising the climate benefits of the alternative fuels. And we are seeing some of the policies start moving around this. We're seeing practically the commitment to the infrastructure being built. But I wanted to stay on that theme of practicality and the financing and the infrastructure, because that's there's so much talk about this. But now we need to really think, what is it that is needed to drive that forward? That is the financing and that is the infrastructure. So perhaps, Paul, I could bring you in here for the World Bank's perspective. Are we seeing the financing of that? Are we seeing the recognition of the climate and low carbon qualities of the alternative fuels? And what is it going to take, in your opinion, to establish this market at a large scale? And what role is the World Bank playing in this?
Okay, very good. I mean, thank you very much for inviting me to join the panel and also to participate to. It's a quite exciting conversation that I've been listening to. But before I respond to your question, I would like just to step back a little bit, since we are at COP, and COP really is about climate change, right? So for us, really, what is important is to realize that the climate change is an emergency. And this emergency is an emergency of our time. So we are really responsible for the next step. And the way I look at what the next step should be, meaning climate actions, I look at them most as an opportunity to change the quality of growth going forward. And therefore, hydrogen or any other technology can be part of a solution. So we should not just look at them as this action as cost. We need to look at them as opportunity that they do provide. I would say four things. When we look at the past, it's always important when you're trying to figure out what you will do in the future to know where you're coming from. And when you look at the past, what did we learn from the past? We have been, in the past, locked into a mechanism that is trading molecules. And we have had some countries, well, I mean, endowed with natural resources like oil, gas, exporting this molecule through global trade. What we have seen in the region so far is that when you export raw material, half processed, you're also exporting jobs opportunity. What I see going forward, and hydrogen can contribute to that, and this is why trade of electrons becomes critical. Instead of trading molecules, we need to trade electrons. Because if you trade electrons, you could use availability of these electrons to also induce appetite for investors to come in your country and help you create the employment opportunity that you need for your youth. And let me give you an example of what we're doing at the World Bank. We are supporting two important initiatives in the MENA region today. One is we have helped the establishment of the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum. And what does that do? Egypt is now positioning itself as a regional hub for energy. What does that mean? Egypt has not only adjusted, modernized its policy and regulatory environment in order to attract more investment into gas and into oil, but also is able, through the investment that has taken place into different platforms, to attract other countries' resources. For example, Israel gas is exported to the global market through LNG terminal in Egypt. So that took the government of Egypt a series of reforms. That's one. And that the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum includes 7 countries in the region, and they're working together to define standards, including standards for carbon capture and storage, so that they can deploy them to reduce emission in gas and also potentially in other industries. The second initiative we are supporting is the Pan-Arab electricity market. One thing interesting to know, all the electricity grids in this region are interconnected physically, but they barely trade electricity cross-border. So the next step is promoting cross-border trade. I mean, we have a region that has 300 gigawatt of installed capacity of electricity. If you want to decarbonize electricity market, you need to deploy more renewable energy. And if you go to it country by country, you limit your possibilities. So interconnecting grids, trading cross-border, will allow these countries to deploy more renewable energy. Our own calculations show if we were to do the Pan-Arab electricity market by 2035, we would achieve 800 gigawatt of installed capacity, out of which you will have 200 gigawatt of renewable energy, solar, wind. And for that to happen, you need commitment at political level. You need credible agreements which are enforceable. So you need to support building trust. And one thing that we have learned from the crisis in Ukraine is that energy security is now the prime concern of most governments, because trust is no longer there. Algeria and Morocco are good examples. I mean, overnight, Morocco lost 20% of its electricity supply capacity just because the gas from Algeria was stopped. So we need to work on these issues, and these issues are likely also to affect the deployment of including hydrogen. Now, more broadly, coming back now to your specific question, during this COP, the World Bank Group has launched 2 major initiatives. One initiative which is about scaling climate action to lower emission. We call it SCALE. It's a $1 billion emission facility that we have established. We are open to receive more contribution from more interested parties so that we can scale up that facility. And the overall objective of that facility is to accelerate deployment of technology that allows the gas, of the oil, or the electricity system to reduce their emission, including industries like cement, steel, all these industries which are intensive consumers of electricity. So that facility would be made available to all countries, and the idea would be to accelerate the development of carbon market. That's more or less the idea that we have. The other facility, which is going to be launched in the next G20 meeting, is a facility that is going to support specifically green hydrogen development. The way we see green hydrogen, this is a market in development. It's far away from being well established, but everything that I've heard here is very encouraging. And I believe we need to work on the different issues that were listed. The first one and the most critical one, we need to avoid, not to be able to get into that market without the credibility of certification. So we need to make sure that when the hydrogen is green, it is really green, not something in between. And then we need to work on the transportation system. Hydrogen is good, but the transportation of hydrogen is much more challenging. If you have fertilizer, you can have ammonia. Then you're much better position. I will probably differ on that when we see that Morocco is not in your group, because Morocco has a comparative advantage when it comes to ammonia because they do a lot of fertilizer. So if they were to get into hydrogen, they could probably draw advantage of the fact that they have fertilizer. And I also believe that in so doing, when we move into hydrogen going forward, I think we will have to get countries to collaborate and cooperate. And this would be my main point here. I see all countries across the world, in Africa, all the countries have everything that is needed to get involved in that market. But I don't believe all these countries will be able to do it. And they need to figure out a way to collaborate, and that's why we are promoting this interconnection and cross-border trade of electrons instead of just trading molecules. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Paul. And I think Kamal wanted to also comment on something here.
Yeah, I fully agree with Paul that in addition to trading the new molecules, the low carbon molecules, the electricity trade will be a significant part of the decarbonization. And it's between countries in Africa, let's say North Africa and also south of the Sahara, but also between the north and the south, but also between North Africa or the MENA region and Europe. In a previous life, I was Minister of Energy in Tunisia. And what we realized is that our use of electricity is very different from the use of electricity in Italy. And Italy is only 140 kilometers from Tunisia. So if you have high voltage DC lines between those two countries, and we have been supported by the World Bank to look at the feasibility, this is absolutely bankable, because when you have your peak use, actually you have low use in Europe and the other way around. So there is a way to complement each other in terms of electricity generation and trade more and more electrons. A second example, when I was in government, the second blackout in the country, whole country blackout, no electricity. And we were saved because we had an interconnection with Algeria. We had 400 megawatts lines which allowed us to do a black start in less than 4 hours. And we will restore 80% of the electricity. So there is a significant advantage of trading electrons.
Great, thank you so much, Kamal. So I wanted to pick up on two themes that Paul mentioned, and that's about action and scale, and ask a question to Adam here on Saudi. We're seeing action, we're seeing commitment to producing both renewables, we're seeing commitment to producing hydrogen, CCS, we're seeing But again, two things. One, do you think you're seeing from your customers the signal that the demand signal that they will need more of this hydrogen and more of this trade? And also from Saudi standpoint, are you seeing more commitment to doing that for the internal market as well?
Let's see, there we go. Daria, did you have something you wanted to say?
That's right, go on. I'll come in later, don't worry.
I saw you. Look, I think that first of all, Saudi Arabia is really committed to this in a big way. We're seeing $5 or $6 billion being invested in clean hydrogen, green hydrogen at NEOM. We're seeing the work that Aramco and SABIC have been doing with Japan and others on ammonia. So I'm trying to get away from the colors as well. But I like to divide this effort up into three areas: technology, regulation, and markets. And then we'll come back. I think it answers your question. You know, and each of these has two subheadings. In technology, the first thing you need is to try the broadest array of possible of technologies. The second thing that you need to do is to get pilot projects and demonstrations going. So part of the answer to your question of customers is many of these technologies are not economic yet, but they could be, and I think they will be if we can get some pilots and demonstrations going to get the learning experiences associated with that. The second part is regulation. We need regulations for encouraging deployment of all of these technologies. And there's an example in the United States, the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act that just passed, will go a long way towards helping that. But Daria said earlier that it's important that this is under regulation still, that we have robust measurement and verification systems. You can't do this without everybody agreeing on what clean means. And the only way that we'll get that is if we have those standards agreed to globally. And I think COP 27, 26, 27, and 28, I think will go a long way towards enabling that. And then finally on the market side, again, two items. We need, I think, to find ways to make this happen at scale. And this is where these carbon hubs that we've been talking about, and I'm going to include hydrogen as part of that, carbon and hydrogen hubs. There's a big effort underway in Houston, Texas, for example, and there will be one, as I mentioned, in Jubail in Saudi Arabia, and there will be others. And Kamal mentioned a number of these opportunities. Final point. If we can get the right technology going, if we can get the right regulations in place, and if we can get the right market structures to encourage all this, then the costs will come down. Then we won't have companies going around searching for customers. The customers will be coming because it'll be economic. We'll turn carbon into a valuable product. It'll either be valuable because it'll be valuable to store it or valuable because we can use it. And it's going to be the combination of all of those things that will drive this effort.
Great, thank you, Adam. And I'd like to pick up on a few things that you said and ask Daria to come in here. We heard we need to make the economics work. Like, to your mind, are we seeing that commitment? And then also, just on the standards piece, do you think countries should feel empowered to show what clean means for them? And are those conversations happening? And again, on this optionality piece, in order to see this start to move at scale, we really do need to have all options on the table. Do you think people have woken up to that? And are we starting to see the action happen around that so we can start driving these projects? And then also on the economics piece of that, is that being recognized so we can start to unlock the capital?
Yeah, great questions. Thank you. On the on the definition of clean, I think the reality is such that we see already countries coming up with different thresholds and coming up with different definitions. Clean, green, renewable, sustainable, low carbon. You have all sorts of definitions that countries are coming up with, and you can have the same thresholds. For example, 3 kilos of CO2 equivalent in country A and country B. Now, if you have different methodologies to assess the carbon footprint of hydrogen, of a unit of hydrogen, to arrive to that threshold, these thresholds are not comparable, right? That brings us back to the need for a common standard methodology to assess the carbon footprint of different production, conditioning, and transportation pathways, and hence the need for consolidation and that work, in particular at ISO level, with the International Organization for Standardization, under the TC 197, the dedicated committee on hydrogen technologies within ISO, Subcommittee 1 on Sustainability, that work has already started. So we are trying to raise awareness among the governments to say, if you're thinking of coming up with a methodology to assess the carbon footprint of hydrogen, hold on, don't do something on your own, join the working group, let's come to a common global standard together. And actually already for beginning of, until the end of next year, we will have something that is called technical specification. So this, you can think of it as a pre-standard type of document, and it will be available for early movers, and early movers can use it as a reference. So I think that this is really a critical piece. And of course, governments will have their sovereign right to say, I would put threshold X or threshold Y to qualify hydrogen as clean, and that's fine. But you need to make sure that you have a common way of assessing the carbon footprint, and then you need to have certification schemes that can talk to each other, and that's where this concept of mutual recognition comes in. And I think that, Paul, you made an excellent point about the need for credible and robust schemes that are also tradable, right? So if you have, we see that, and why is this important, and that goes also to your question, Olivia. Interestingly, people, it's commonplace to draw parallels between the hydrogen market and the LNG market, and how it can evolve going forward in terms of cross-border trade. But interesting, when it comes to the value of hydrogen, it's contained not only in the value of the physical product, but importantly in the value of the environmental attribute. And in order to unlock that value of the environmental attribute, you would need to access different compliance markets, right? And we see different compliance markets emerging in different jurisdictions. So that, and either linked to thresholds or some specific qualifications for hydrogen, that's where the need for robust and tradable certification schemes comes in, because it would be absolutely crucial to make sure that market participants can access different compliance markets with a single scheme or a single certificate. And that's what we are working on. We actually, as the Hydrogen Council, will be soon releasing a roadmap for robust and tradable certification schemes for hydrogen and a checklist. So if you're a national authority, you're looking to establish a certification scheme for hydrogen, what are the key principles that you need to bear in mind if you would like your scheme to be robust and to be credible, but also to be tradable and enable that mutual recognition and allow it to be recognized in third-party jurisdictions. So I think that unlocking that value of hydrogen in compliance markets is something that certification schemes will play an important role in. Definitely we will see more and more activities across governments. We already know that governments from Australia to UAE to Germany and many others are eyeing the development of their own certification schemes. So mutual recognition will be key to unlock the market value of hydrogen across geographies and across different compliance markets.
Great, thank you so much, Daria. Adam, you wanted to add something here?
Let me just, a 10-second intervention. What you asked and Daria mentioned, I just want to highlight that every country's contribution should be valued in some way. National circumstances are different across the world. And again, this problem is so big, we need everything. Let's not leave anything on the table. And let's get everybody working towards this in the best way that they can in their own home country.
Great, thanks, Adam. So just on I want to bring it back to the economic piece of this, because we're hearing so much talk about hydrogen and the needs for standards, the needs for verification, the need for policies, the need for regulation. But again, another theme that we keep hearing is the cost. And the fact that this at the moment is more expensive than the fossil fuel, the unabated fossil fuel alternative. So in order to start seeing this scale and see the cost curve come down, we need to start seeing commitment, we need to start seeing the infrastructure being built. We also need to start internalizing the cost of climate into that equation as well. So Kamal, maybe I could invite you to come in here. What are some of the policies that you see would be needed to start unlocking that value? And are we seeing any best practices from across the region that are helping to kickstart this from a financial standpoint?
So when I think so when you started the session, Olivia, you had a graph that was showing the wedges of decarbonization, and this is the work. Actually, I was at the IEA when we were generating these graphs. One thing that people have to realize that these graphs represent actually some assumptions in terms of carbon prices going into the future. And if you look at the sustainable development scenario, we are looking at $150 to $200 per ton of CO2 to reach those objectives. And so if you don't have those policies that enable those CO2 prices, and mostly from the end user standpoint, I think we'll be missing the boat. I think that we need to have what it takes in order to move to prices that justify the investment in those low carbon technologies. And this would be, we are talking about the 45Q today, but going into the future, we need to go into this $150 to $200 per ton CO2.
Great, thank you so much, Kamal. Paul, did you want to add anything here?
Yeah, I mean, I will probably add to the previous conversation on the need for compatibility, because, I mean, while every country's situation is unique and has to be taken into account, for credibility across border, you have to have compatibility in terms of what I consider as a standard, right? So that's why international cooperation is so critical, to define the set of commonly agreed standard, and also probably to empower a set of institutions which can therefore say that everything that is coming is compliant. Because otherwise we're killing the market. Because if I'm not so sure that the green is green, then the market will never take off. And I think the first thing to work on is really building credibility so that the market can build on it to grow. The other thing I wanted to add, I mean, talking about green hydrogen, we all agree it comes from water. And we are in a region which is the most water scarce. This region is the most water scarce. It means that hydrogen will come from desalinated water, most of it. It means you will have a lot of side effects, negative externalities coming from that overuse of that water. And I think that part of the conversation is always overlooked. In my view, we should really start thinking about it. Just to give you a number, 6 out of 10 people in this region live in highly water-stressed areas. What does that mean? Some people have to move because the water is no longer available. The fresh water is no longer available. And what do government do? They need to get the water from the sea, invest into power plants which are green, get the water desalinated, and get that water available to people. And then now we're going to be competing in that, in doing hydrogen. That's why I think some of the things we're talking about have to be considered with that mindset. And I think some trade-off will have to be considered as also.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is why this conversation is so important, to put on the table that each region has different priorities and different considerations. So when we talk about hydrogen in the Middle East, North Africa region, we need to be looking at all forms of producing hydrogen, both the green, both the low carbon alternative, if we want to have any chance of bending the emissions curve. So I wanted to see if anyone in the audience would like to ask a question, or if we can continue. Anyone want to ask a question? No? Yeah, okay.
Hi. I heard, sorry. I heard two very, this is the, sorry. Just to point out, I heard some bit of very divergent views, like you, Paul, you kept mentioning about the green hydrogen, whereas you from the Hydrogen Council kept saying that we shouldn't look at the colors. And I think colors is the key. So there are very confusing signals coming, and also I think it's good to point out the last point which you made, that the trade-offs have to be made. But those trade-offs, I think the water or electricity, I think those are, and we already know the answer, that we need water first. I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And actually, yeah, it's actually a great opportunity to clarify this, because I think that there's a lot of confusion, and the color code system tends to generate a lot of confusion, because what is green? Not all the electricity that we consume is green, quote unquote, you know? Oftentimes when we power electric vehicles, the electricity can come from coal-fired power generation, right? So electricity does not equal green electrons, right? So it really depends on the source. Having a common methodology to assess all hydrogen production pathways is the only way to allow the least carbon-intensive solution to shine. So what you're describing, it's absolutely, and rightfully so, that having hydrogen produced from renewable power, of course, can constitute the least carbon-intensive solution and the least carbon-intensive production pathways, and that's absolutely key, of course. Having said that, the term sort of, the color code system does not reflect that carbon intensity, and it doesn't allow for transparency, I would say. And actually, I fully agree with Paul. We need transparency and we need credibility. So qualifying something as green needs to be informed by a robust and credible standard and a robust and credible methodology to actually assess on the life cycle basis how this unit of hydrogen was produced. So I think it's absolutely key, and part of the reason why I think that we are there is this confusion over the color code system and what means what is because we sort of resort to this because it used to be, I think, convenient in the beginning, but right now, as we consider different production pathways, we need to focus on the carbon footprint because that's the key benchmark that tells us about, indeed, the performance from the carbon abatement and from the climate value of this unit of hydrogen. So I think it's a great question. I think we absolutely have to focus on the carbon footprint, indeed, rather than the carbon, because that allows us to have a better insight into the carbon value and sort of the carbon abatement value of a given unit of hydrogen. And on the water side, I think that it's absolutely critical issue for the region, and we already see projects and hydrogen projects that allow for a circular approach to the project development where you have hydrogen-based solutions to allow for water desalination, to enable greater access to actually desalinated clean water in the region. So rather than seeing it as a challenge, I would see it as a huge opportunity to enable for greater desalinated water capacity for the region that is indeed so in such a desperate need for that. Thank you.
You know, I'd like to add something. Daria mentioned focusing on the carbon footprint. Carbon is not the enemy, right? There's three ways to think about carbon. There's the biological carbon. That's good. That's us, you know, in the trees. So that's fine. And then there's technical carbon. It can be locked up for hundreds or thousands of years in different ways. So the problem is fugitive carbon. It's the carbon where we don't want it. So we need to think about recarbonizing, getting the carbon out of the places that we don't want it, like the atmosphere, for example, or in plastics in the oceans, and getting that carbon to be useful. So I want to come back to, again, it's emissions. We want to We want to deal with the emissions. That's what's creating the problem. And if you do the measurement that we've all been talking about, then you'll actually start to make progress towards, again, then you won't care. Blue carbon is going to be fine, or blue ammonia, blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, pink. It doesn't matter what the color is. If we can measure it, get it out of the atmosphere where we don't want it, then we're in business. Then we're actually solving the problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam. Kamal, I think you also want to weigh in here, and then Paul.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that if I look at the current production of fossil fuels in the region, there is some fantastic work done by CAPSAG on the carbon intensity of oil and gas. There is a fantastic work done by CAPSAG on the carbon intensity of oil and gas, which is showing that oil and gas in the region has some of the lower CO2 associated content. And actually the region is even looking at dividing by 2 or 3 that CO2. So it's already a very significant step in terms of reduction of the carbon footprint of the industry.
I think we have covered the ground. I'm not going to repeat, but it's important to focus on emission, in my view, because this is where we have action that we need to take. And that's the reason why we have set up that new facility that we call Scale, because it's also about supporting the market deployment. Because if that facility is in place, if the carbon market gets in place, and countries get the support they need through such a mechanism, then we will be able to accelerate emission reduction. I mean, there are many measures that could be easily achievable. I mean, look at just gas flaring. I mean, if you fly over the region nighttime, you see a lot of gas being flared. I mean, that gas could be captured, reprocessed, and reutilized. But it just needs policy, some regulation, and eventually, in some case, some incentive. And this is what we're trying to do through such a facility. And I believe the conversation and the discussion around green, blue, or whatever, okay, we can have it. But at the end of the day, what really matters is to get to a point whereby we don't contribute to the problem. We need to start really resolving the problem. Let me stop.
Great, thank you so much, Paul, and thank you so much. I think we're going to have to close here, but I will try to summarize some of the takeaways of this conversation. So we need to focus on emissions, not the colors. We need to measure that. We need to find standards. We need to find regulations. We need global agreement. That's going to take collaboration, partnerships, alignment, more dialogues. We're hearing really exciting announcements coming out of the Middle East, North Africa region. They have their own priorities to consider. We're talking about a water scarce region, so all options will need to be on the table because we just don't know how how these technologies are going to go and how this energy transition is going to look. Hubs, really important. We're hearing hubs in Egypt, Morocco, Saudi, UAE, 6 potential hubs announced in this region, which is demonstrating some of those policies and business models to help try and get some of these solutions to take off and see them practically deployed. So we need options, we need that physical infrastructure, and I think with that we can close and allow for follow-on conversations. Thank you so much.